What if D-Day failed? How one day could have changed the outcome of World War II. June 6, 1944. Before dawn, the English Channel was crowded with ships, thousands of them. Warships, transport vessels, landing craft, all moving slowly through rough seas toward the coast of Nazi-occupied France. Above them, aircraft roared through the darkness, carrying paratroopers who had no idea where they would land, or if they would survive the night. This was Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in human history. Today, D-Day is remembered as a triumph, a moment of courage, coordination, and sacrifice that began the liberation of Western Europe and led directly to the defeat of Nazi Germany. It is taught as an inevitable turning point, the moment the Allies finally returned to the continent. But history often hides how fragile success really was. What is rarely discussed is how close D-Day came to complete failure. The invasion depended on precise timing, good weather, faulty German assumptions, and decisions made by exhausted men under immense pressure. If just a few of those factors had shifted, the outcome could have been catastrophic. So the question is not whether D-Day was heroic. The question is this: what if it failed? Not delayed, not partially successful, but decisively defeated, with Allied forces pushed back into the sea. To understand how plausible this scenario was, we have to understand the situation in early 1944. By that point, the war had been raging for nearly 5 years. Germany still occupied most of Europe, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, all under Nazi control. The Soviet Union was fighting desperately in the east, absorbing unimaginable losses as it pushed German forces back toward their own borders. Stalin had been demanding a second front since 1941. Without it, the Red Army would continue bleeding alone. The Western Allies knew this, but invading Europe was not simply a matter of will. The German Atlantic Wall stretched from the Arctic Circle to the Spanish border. Thousands of concrete fortifications, artillery batteries positioned to fire directly onto beaches, minefields, anti-tank obstacles, and machine gun nests designed to turn any landing into a killing zone. And the Allies had only one real chance. Landing craft took years to build. Trained assault troops could not be replaced quickly. A failed invasion would not just be a setback, it could delay a second attempt for years. General Eisenhower understood this so clearly that he wrote a short statement in advance, accepting full responsibility if the invasion failed. It was not symbolic. It was practical. That letter exists because failure was a real possibility. The weather alone nearly cancelled the operation. A massive storm had already delayed the invasion once. Seas were rough, winds were strong, clouds threatened to ground aircraft. If conditions worsened even slightly, naval bombardment would become inaccurate, airborne operations would fall apart, and coordination between land, sea, and air forces would collapse. In fact, parts of it already did. On the night before the landings, Allied paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines. Many missed their drop zones by miles. Some drowned in flooded fields. Others landed alone, disoriented, and were captured or killed before dawn. They succeeded only because German confusion mirrored Allied chaos. That confusion was not guaranteed. German defenses in Normandy were stronger than Allied intelligence believed. At Omaha Beach in particular, unexpected fortifications turned the landing into a nightmare. Landing craft were destroyed before reaching shore. Units became pinned down. Officers were killed, leaving men without leadership, hiding behind obstacles under relentless machine gun fire. At several points during the morning, Omaha Beach was on the verge of total failure. There were serious discussions about evacuation. If Omaha had collapsed completely, the consequences would have been immediate. The American sector would fail. Supply lines would break down. German forces could concentrate against the remaining beaches. The invasion, instead of expanding inland, would begin shrinking. Now imagine that situation spreading. Imagine the weather worsening, air support grounded, naval guns unable to see their targets, German commanders reacting faster, releasing armored divisions immediately instead of waiting for Hitler's approval. Tanks reaching the beaches while infantry was still struggling to organize. Infantry without anti-tank weapons, pinned down on open sand, facing armored counterattacks. That is not a battle. That is a massacre. By the evening of June 6th, Allied commanders could be forced to make a brutal decision: stay and be destroyed, or withdraw and accept defeat. Evacuation under fire would be chaos: ships hit by artillery, landing craft destroyed, thousands of wounded left behind, equipment abandoned, entire units captured. The greatest invasion ever attempted would end not with a foothold in Europe, but with burning wreckage floating in the Channel. The immediate consequences would be staggering. Militarily, the Allies would lose tens of thousands of men in a single day. Many would be prisoners. Specialized landing craft would be destroyed in huge numbers, and replacing them would take years. Experienced assault units would no longer exist. Politically, the shock would be enormous. In Britain, Winston Churchill's government would likely collapse under the weight of the disaster. In the United States, Roosevelt would face fierce criticism in an election year, accused of wasting lives and resources on a reckless gamble. And in Moscow, Stalin's anger would be cold and unforgiving. The Soviet Union would conclude that the West was either unwilling or incapable of confronting Germany directly. From that moment on, the Red Army would push westward alone, and it would succeed, but at a terrible cost. Without a Western front, Germany could concentrate far more forces against the Soviets. The fighting in Eastern Europe would become even more brutal than it already was. Cities would be destroyed completely. Casualties would rise into the tens of millions. But eventually, the sheer weight of Soviet manpower and industry would overwhelm Germany. Berlin would still fall. The difference is who would take it and what would happen afterward. In this scenario, the Red Army would not stop at Berlin. With no Allied forces in France, there would be nothing to prevent Soviet troops from liberating and occupying all of Central and Western Europe. France, Italy, the Low Countries, possibly even parts of Scandinavia, would fall under Soviet influence. Post-war Europe would look nothing like the continent we know today. There would be no divided Germany, no West Germany, no Marshall Plan, no NATO. Germany would become a single Soviet-aligned state. The Iron Curtain would not run through Europe. Europe itself would be behind it. Democracy would survive in isolated pockets, but the idea of a free, united Western Europe would never emerge. The European Union, as we understand it, would be impossible. The Cold War would begin not with two roughly balanced sides, but with one dominant bloc stretching from the Pacific to the Atlantic. Nuclear weapons would not be tools of deterrence between equals, but instruments of pressure wielded by superpowers in a deeply unstable world. And the story we tell ourselves about World War II would be fundamentally different. There would be no clear narrative of liberation from the West. No beaches remembered as symbols of freedom. No sense that democracy decisively turned the tide. History would remember a different lesson. That victory was not inevitable, that freedom was not guaranteed, and that the fate of millions can hinge on weather, timing, and decisions made in a single day. D-Day succeeded, but just barely. And if it had failed, the world we live in today would be unrecognizable. Different borders, different governments, different lives. Sometimes history turns on centuries of slow change, and sometimes it turns on one storm, one beach, and one day in June. What do you think would have happened? Leave a comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe.